but also the whole world. Don't be complicit in the silence. Be the architects of change. We can no longer afford to wait. History is watching us. For the rest, I can assure you that, more than ever, the Congolese people are determined to defend and preserve the integrity of their territory. Whatever the cost, I thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. So, I guess you've outlined a number of important points there. But what, in your view, is needed to stop the fighting? What is needed to put an end to the war? But it's simple. What's needed is to put the finger on who is really responsible for this known situation. It's Rwanda. The international community took pity, as we all did at the time, in 1994, when Rwanda was the victim of genocide, and the latter, the international community, asked the Democratic Republic of Congo, at the time Zaire, to open its borders to welcome the flood of refugees who were scourging the genocide. And hundreds of thousands of them arrived in the Republic of Zaire, and unfortunately, among them were the perpetrators of the genocide too. Later, Rwanda obtained the right to sue the Republic of Congo, genocide on Congolese soil. Incredible. The international community has completely abdicated its responsibilities, its mission, by letting a state, a regime, settle its accounts. And there have been massacres of entire populations, including Congolese populations, and we killed ourselves in the name of the guilt that the international community felt about the Rwandan genocide. But the Congo was neither guilty nor an accomplice to that genocide, because since then, unfortunately, the misfortunes that were in Rwanda have been invited into the Democratic Republic of Congo and have been for 30 years. All hell has broken loose in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so we let Rwanda have its way. And by coming in like that, they discovered that there was an opportunity to destabilize the regime first. So they destabilized the regime of Marshal Mobutu by installing Laurent Desire Kabila, thinking that with him, they could quietly exploit the resources of the Democratic Republic of Congo. But when Laurent Desire Kabila objected, he was shut down to make way for another regime, one that was much more pliable, much more understanding, that of Joseph Kabila, and let a lot of things happen. And Rwanda has become more confident. Rwanda has developed its economy, strengthened its economy with the proceeds from the plundering of our natural resources. And with the complicit eye of the international community, since these products were sold to large multinationals. Some states bought all this and strengthened Rwanda's position. And today we have the result. The international community must accept its responsibilities and settle this issue at the same time as we do. You mentioned a scenario where the war will expand, where there will be a war. If I've understood correctly, regionally, how do you explain that? Well, quite simply because Rwanda has expansionist ambitions. For some years now, the Rwandan regime has been saying that part of the republic of the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, in particular the territories of Masisi and Rwanda, once belonged to Rwanda, to the Kingdom of Rwanda, which is an aberration. It's not true. But it does indicate very clearly the intentions. In fact, in Masisi, there is a mine in a place, a locality called Rubaya, and it's there that we find the ores of coltan and the 3 T's, the 3 highly prized materials of a stadium and of a tantal. It's these 3 materials that go into the composition of all production of models, technological devices, of new ranges and all that. And so these are highly prized materials which are precisely fueling this conflict of blood. It's because Rwanda is obliged, in order to steal, to plunder our resources, to create permanent instability in which there is no state authority in this region, to provoke a kind of ethnic cleansing by frightening, by massacres, by inflicting fear, terror, and by pushing these populations to move, to leave them free. It's so that he can explain his exploits quietly. Do you have an alternative vision of how natural resources should be accessed, managed, and the revenues? What would you prefer? What's the alternative? Of course, but the alternative is investment. I think that we need to draw up contracts that are transparent with firms working in the field. And that's what we keep saying every day. That's why we filed a complaint against Apple, for example, which was one of the beneficiaries of this illegal trade. And since then, they have said that they would no longer deal in materials from Rwanda or Congo. And so, we believe that we did this not to punish Apple, but to draw its attention and direct it towards the competent authorities who can conclude this kind of contract in due form. And that's what we need to do, set up companies that can invest and exploit. It's this wealth that needs to be produced and transformed locally to create domestic wealth and jobs. And that's how we're going to, we think, pacify the region, because all these young people who are going to come to look for work, who are going to enter this professional circuit, will no longer be attracted by the activities in the mines, or else by activities in armed groups. So this will have the advantage of bringing some sort of peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, you said that the international community had a choice of being spectators or to engage in a responsible manner. And there's a meeting in Addis Ababa, I think today or tomorrow. And then you also have some Duma. And then here in Munich, we have some very distinguished leaders from the United States and from the European Union. What is your message to the African Union, and what is your message to other international partners in terms of taking action? Action. Yes. The first message, since you're talking about the European Union, is already to tell it to put an end to this scandalous and unacceptable agreement to buy back precious materials, critical mining materials, which to buy these raw precious materials from Rwanda. Because quite simply, Rwanda has none of these materials in its subsoil. So that's the message, the first one I'll give. The second is to say that today there is a humanitarian tragedy unfolding before our eyes. And these people who, even before the fall of Goma, had gathered around the town of Goma in their millions in makeshift camps. They were told to leave these camps and return to their places of origin, with no transport, no guarantee of finding anything there, because their fields have been destroyed, schools and all that. Some of them are children, so they'll have to make the journey back to their locality with all the insecurity that can arise because it's a war zone. So the humanitarian tragedy that we were already deploring a few months ago around the town of Goma is likely to get worse. So there is an urgent need. This is what I will also be appealing for in the coming weeks. Absolutely. Even today, even in the days ahead. Yes, coming. We need to intervene very quickly because in their murderous madness, these invaders have asked all these people to return without organizing their return. Thank you for that. And there are some who don't know where to go, who don't know what to do, because there's nothing to go to live. In those camps, at least, there was humanitarian aid that allowed them to eat and, well, to live more or less, even if the conditions weren't decent. But here, there's nothing. There are days and days of walking with no guarantee of finding anything to eat. So, Addis Ababa. In Addis Ababa, there's a meeting of the Peace and Security Commission this evening. We'll wait and see what happens. The Prime Minister and head of government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is there. In any case, she is here to speak, to carry the voice of our country. I've come here to meet European and American decision makers so that pressure can be stepped up. And why not? Sanctions can even be imposed on Rwanda, because when you look at our situation alongside that of Ukraine and Russia, you'd think we were in two different worlds, when in fact it's practically the same thing. You have the impression that the world doesn't know what's going on. Is that it? Here it's worse because it's a conflict that's been going on for 30 years now. Of course it is. Whereas Russia and Ukraine went to war, let's say roughly in 2022, even though there had already been a certain amount of talk since 2014. But when we see the fury with which Russia's account has been settled, the accounts in relation to what? To the ignorance that there is, or the forgetfulness. In relation to our conflict, there is reason to wonder whether these are not double standards. That's why in my previous panel, I talked about a multilateralism that's broken down, that has serious operational problems. So, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to invite questions, if there are any. Are there any questions to the chairman? No? Yes, there are. So, there in the fourth row. Hello again, Mr. Chairman. My name is Nanifo, journalist at Dutch Valley. The question I wanted to ask is about the M23. You said bluntly that there is no dead discourse between you and the M23. Is that a good strategy for reconciliation and for finding solutions to the situation in the DRC? That's my first question. And the second question is, you talked about the need for investment in the DRC, but there has been China and other countries too have invested in the DRC, but there hasn't been much change in the country in terms of education, in terms of roads, in terms of improving the living conditions of citizens. What I wanted to ask is what? What more do you want, and what can change the situation in the country at the moment? Thank you. Already in relation to the first question, you should know that it's not a question of ego, a question of pride or arrogance when we refuse to talk directly with the M23. The first reason is that the M23 has massacred people and bombed camps for displaced people where there were women and children. They were massacred. So, as far as we're concerned, it's a terrorist movement, and we don't negotiate or discuss with terrorists. The second reason is because of the Nairobi process. The Nairobi process settles the question of armed groups. So, as the M23 is an armed group, it is in the same boat as all the other armed groups operating in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it must be treated in the same way, so it must fit into this framework. The third reason is that the M23 is a movement, I was going to say, that is devoid of content. It is, in fact, a Rwandan auxiliary. The M23 is a kind of screen that Rwanda puts up. But in reality, behind it, it's the Rwandan army, and therefore Rwanda that's fighting. The proof of what I'm saying. In the Luanda process, in Luanda, in Angola, we discussed with Rwanda. If Rwanda had nothing to do with this conflict, why did it respond to the facilitators' invitations to discuss with the Democratic Republic of Congo? So you understand that it is Rwanda that is hiding behind and sending a so-called Congolese movement. It is Rwanda that is hiding behind and sending a so-called Congolese movement who are going to come to the table, to the negotiating table, to talk about Rwanda's interests. So we might as well talk to the Godfather himself, so that he can tell us what his interests are, instead of wasting our time and our dignity talking to someone else. So that's the reason why we're saying it. And when you say that it won't make progress, yes, it will make peace progress, because, as I told you, the Nairobi process is there. And the Nairobi process was precisely inspired to resolve the problem of the armed groups. With regard to investors, you mentioned the Chinese and others. You're right, it hasn't. These investments or these exploitations of mines, of Congolese minerals with Chinese or other contracts haven't yielded much. But you're right, in 2019, well, we unfortunately had the year of COVID, which paralyzed international trade for about 2 years, 2020 to 2021. But in 2021, I started again. So I spoke to the Chinese to tell them that I didn't agree with the way in which our partnership was being undertaken. And so for me, it was a question of reviewing the terms of all these contracts that had been signed before my advent and to move on to models that would be win-win with the possibility, therefore, for us, the Congolese, as I said earlier in my previous speech there, to move towards win-win models, which would mean that we would develop these products. So in addition to having produced them, we process them in our own country. And so we add value to these products, which create wealth and jobs. Subtitles by the Amara.org community. The only challenge we face today is the energy challenge because these minerals, as you can imagine, require a lot of energy to be extracted from the subsoil and also processed. So we're in a process that will take us to these stages that will enable us to create a value chain within our own country, and that you will see will have a positive economic and social impact. So this process has begun. Unfortunately, it is going to be interrupted again because of these stupid and unjust wars that are being imposed on us. Because we will now be obliged to mobilize the resources that we had perhaps prepared or planned for the construction of energy infrastructures, road infrastructures, and others to strengthen the capacities of our defense army and thus be able to face up to this aggression. Unfortunately, we will lose even more time, but that, of course, is surely the enemy's objective, to distract us, to slow us down, to destabilize us while he plunders our resources and sells them to the highest bidder. Are there any other questions? One question, Mr. President, I want to ask you is what is your expectation of the Rwanda process now? What do you want? What is the future of? Yes. Now, the Luanda process, I think it's experiencing some turbulence because I think you followed the speech by President Joao Lorenzo, who is going to become the current chairman of the African Union and who is therefore going to have a much fuller, denser agenda that will not allow him, goodbye, to continue managing. Goodbye. But the question was anticipated recently at the joint summit between the East African Community and SADC. I say that it was anticipated in the sense that we were already thinking about these burdens that are going to increase for President Joao Lorenzo and therefore to see how we can bring in other heads of state, one or two more, who will allow him to maneuver more comfortably. And now that he is withdrawing altogether, it will no longer be a matter of adding heads of state, but of appointing heads of state to take over. So the process is not dead. It's just slowing down. In the meantime, I hope the appointment of the president, Joao Lorenzo, and of a new facilitator. So I can continue to ask questions, but are there any questions from the floor? Please. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. I'm interested in the case you had with the apple, and I wonder if there are any future possibilities for public and private sector solutions to the problem of critical minerals. And I wonder if perhaps the example of the Kimberley process with conflict diamonds would be a possibility. Yes, I think you're right. And I've already said that for other minerals such as coltan, gold, cassiterite, and so on, there may also be a need for a Kimberley process for these minerals too. I think that would be a good thing, one that would enable us to regulate this market. Thank you for your time. Goodbye. Where we need identification, genotype, in fact, we'll say of the ore, because today there are techniques that can identify the origin of the ore and its very location of the place where it was extracted, and so be able to organize or track its traceability. There are companies that do that too. So I think that would be the solution. Now, in relation to Apple, I was going to say that, as I said earlier, the aim wasn't to target Apple. It was it's the symbol of that because Apple is mobile phones, and in mobile phones you find the coltan of the Congo, the coltan of blood. And the aim was to appeal to them to say, stop this massacre. Because with the money you put into this sector to buy minerals stolen from the Democratic Republic of Congo, you are encouraging massacres. Massacres of Congolese people, poor Congolese people. So we had to make this appeal and tell them, if you want to continue this trade, come in through the front door. The authorities of the Democratic Republic of Congo exist, are legally and legitimately established, and are only asking for this kind of partnership. Come on, let's work together. That's what we need to do in a win-win partnership that will enable you to develop, to flourish in your activities, and the Republic too to do the same. So that's how we see it, but unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Thank you for your time. Are there any other questions on the floor? Mr. Chairman, one question I wanted to ask you was about opposition. You mentioned that, you've been president for 6 years and there are elections in the DRC. What about opposition within the DRC? Is that a factor? In terms of bringing this conflict to an end or complicating it further? First of all, the situation of the opposition. I was going to say it is, we find today in the Democratic Republic of Congo two kinds of opposition. Congo, two kinds of opposition. In its activities normally, which took part in the last elections on equal terms with President Sorotin, and which lost its elections in a clear manner, and this has been recognized by all serious observers. And there is another opposition, that of the power of my predecessor, which completely refused to enter into the process, to participate in the electoral process, refused, precisely because it was preparing the destabilization that should normally have taken place since 2023 to prevent the elections from being held. But since they didn't succeed in doing so. So the elections went ahead anyway. And now they're finding a way to join forces with Rwanda and this M23 and F to wage war against us and destabilize the country. That's what needs to be done. So these are the two oppositions. So when you ask whether they have any, how did you put it, sort of influence on things, of course, because they have a capacity to cause harm, as they have demonstrated, by allying themselves with Rwanda and destabilizing the country. But my role is to make everyone face up to their responsibilities. History will judge us, because those who are the victims today of these excesses, I was going to say, of the opposition, are Congolese. And these Congolese will judge these people. One day, they will know who did what. I say here that democracy in our country has never behaved as well as it did under my presidency. In that country, when we were in opposition, opponents were assassinated. The authorities would send hordes of police and military officers into churches to shoot down opponents. Demonstrations were banned. Every time there were demonstrations. People had to be killed. Today, that no longer happens. All demonstrations go off without a hitch. Rights and freedoms are respected. Of course, if things go wrong, we punish them, because we mustn't confuse opposition and anarchy. So those who engage in anarchy, they are summoned to the court, and they will justify themselves. So I have absolutely no impression that the opposition who took up arms, who fomented with Rwanda this coup against the Republic, is in its right. Moreover, the proof is that the real instigators and the real sponsor of this opposition is my predecessor, Joseph Kabila. But he won't admit it. He doesn't take responsibility for his actions. There you have it. You know, to finish where we started, the human tragedy in your country, the number of people killed, the number of women in particular who have been victims of sexual violence, the number of displaced people. And yet we are living at a time when the availability of humanitarian resources support is going down, and where there are huge demands on rich countries, for other crises. Have you, in your conversations here in Munich, been talking to Americans, Europeans? I see many leading figures from the Middle East about the need to attract more support in this area and more action. Well, yes, I've spoken to Americans, Europeans, and soon even some people from the Middle East, but more diplomatic and political than humanitarian, because I don't think that they had answers to my humanitarian needs, but the message still got through because you don't have an answer because they don't have the means or they don't know about it, or no, I suppose they don't because they're not in the field. The ones I've seen aren't in the humanitarian field. Oh, well, okay. So that's that. But I still got the message across so that they in turn could pass it on to those who have the means to mobilize. The means to mobilize to deal with the humanitarian tragedy our people are currently experiencing. So I didn't talk to them directly about it because they didn't have the capacity to do so. Okay, well then, it remains for me to thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much for being with us. And I don't know if you have a message when you finish. Yes, a message, a final word, perhaps to say once again, that the Democratic Republic of Congo is in the process of experiencing a real tragedy. And what you see today is something that has been going on for 30 years. Today, it looks like a new conflict, but in reality, it's a latent conflict. For 30 years now, these people have always been in distress. They are displaced. Women are raped. Their produce is stolen too in their fields. So everything is done to destabilize this region and strip it of all its wealth. This is done for the benefit of the big companies who then process it. It's produced into what you see here, what you buy here, that is mobile phones, that is your tea, your coffee, or your cocoa, and what have you. So there are lots of products that arrive here in the West that are products of the blood of Congolese people who die innocently for the simple fault of living on a land that abounds in riches within it. So it's really a flagrant injustice that requires those who are silent to stand up and react, because this land risks being seen as an accomplice to injustice. I'm counting on the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo to take action. So I'm counting on each and every one of you here who has the slightest little power, either to pass on a message or to take a decision at your own little level, whatever it may be. It would be a symbolic contribution, a contribution that would perhaps bring solutions to the tragedies being experienced by our people in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. There you are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.